He thought he'd buried his past beneath layers of success and steel-framed skyscrapers. But when the elevator doors opened on the 47th floor of his corporate empire, revealing the woman he'd abandoned 8 years ago, now visibly pregnant and holding his company's employment contract, Omar Rashid realized that some ghosts refused to stay buried. She wasn't just back in his life. She was about to become his daily reality. And the secret she carried would turn his perfectly orchestrated world into chaos. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine marble floors of Rashid International's headquarters in downtown Cairo. 47 floors of glass and ambition stretched toward the sky, each level a testament to Omar Rashid's relentless pursuit of power. At 38, he commanded a business empire worth over $3 billion, with ventures spanning from luxury real estate to cutting-edge technology, from the bustling streets of Cairo to the gleaming towers of Singapore. Omar stood behind, the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, surveying the city that bent to his will. The view was intoxicating, a sprawling metropolis where his influence touched every major development, every significant deal. His reflections stared back at him from the glass, perfectly groomed black hair, sharp jawline, and eyes that had learned to reveal nothing. The custom-tailored Italian suit fit his athletic frame like armor, projecting the image of a man who had never known defeat. But appearances, as Omar had learned, could be the most elaborate of lies. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Rashid, the morning briefing is ready in conference room A." "5 minutes," he replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority that made grown men in boardrooms shift uncomfortably in their seats. The briefing was routine: quarterly projections, merger negotiations, expansion plans across 3 continents. Omar absorbed every detail with the precision of a machine, his mind cataloging information, calculating risks, identifying opportunities. This was his domain, where emotions were weaknesses, and sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Sir," ventured his chief financial officer, a nervous man named Hassan, who always seemed to perspire slightly in Omar's presence, "there's the matter of your personal assistant position. We've been operating without permanent support staff for 3 weeks now." Omar's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The previous assistant had quit abruptly, citing incompatible working styles, corporate speak for finding Omar impossible to work with. It was a pattern he'd grown accustomed to. People entered his orbit with grand ambitions and left with shattered nerves. "Handle it," Omar said curtly. "I don't care about their credentials or their pedigree. I need someone competent, discreet, and resilient enough to last more than 6 months. What he didn't say, what he never admitted to anyone, including himself, was that he preferred the isolation. Keeping people at arm's length was safer. It prevented complications, messy entanglements, and the kind of pain that had once nearly destroyed him. After the meeting, Omar retreated to his office sanctuary. The space was a masterpiece of minimalist luxury: imported marble, rare wood accents, and furniture that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Every element was chosen for its beauty and its emotional neutrality. There were no family photos, no personal mementos, nothing that might betray the existence of a life beyond profit margins and power plays. He settled behind his desk, a massive slab of black granite that seemed to reflect his mood, and opened his laptop. Emails flooded the screen: urgent requests from London, investment opportunities from Dubai, legal documents requiring his signature. This was his rhythm, his refuge. Numbers made sense. Contracts had clear terms. Business relationships had defined parameters, unlike the chaos of human emotions. His phone buzzed with a text from his younger brother, Tariq. "Mother is asking about grandchildren again." I'm running out of deflections. Omar deleted the message without responding. His family's expectations were another weight he carried, another reminder of the life he was supposed to want, but couldn't seem to access. At 38, he was considered one of Cairo's most eligible bachelors, a title that felt more like a burden than a blessing. The endless parade of introductions, the careful orchestration of chance encounters at charity galas, the hopeful glances from families eager to align themselves with his fortune, it all felt hollow. The truth was that Omar had loved once, completely and recklessly, and when that love had demanded a choice between his heart and his family's approval, between passion and propriety, he had chosen wrong. The memory of that choice haunted him in ways that $3 billion couldn't silence. His intercom buzzed. Again. Mr. Rashid, HR has sent up 3 candidates for the assistant position. Shall I have them wait? Send them in one at a time, Omar replied, straightening his tie. Let's get this over with. The first candidate was precisely what he expected. A young man fresh from university, eager and terrified in equal measure. He stumbled through basic questions about scheduling and correspondence, his hands trembling as he fumbled with his portfolio. Omar dismissed him within 10 minutes. The second was a middle-aged woman with impressive credentials but an unfortunate tendency to offer unsolicited opinions about office decor and workflow improvements. She lasted 15 minutes before Omar's icy stare sent her scurrying toward the door. One more, his temporary assistant announced through the intercom. Omar glanced at his watch. The day was already running behind schedule, and his patience was wearing thin. Fine, send them in. He heard the soft click of heels on marble, measured and confident. Professional. He didn't look up from his screen immediately, a power play he'd perfected over years of negotiations. Let them wait. Let them absorb the weight of his authority before he granted them his attention. Please, take a seat, he said without lifting his gaze, gesturing toward the leather chair across from his desk. Thank you. The voice hit him like a physical blow, soft, melodic, with the faint accent that had once whispered his name in the darkness of quiet hotel rooms. His blood turned to ice in his veins, and for the first time in 8 years, Omar Rashid felt his carefully constructed world begin to crack. He looked up slowly, hoping against hope that his mind was playing tricks on him. But there she was, sitting across from his desk, as if 8 years of silence hadn't passed between them. Zara Okafor, the woman he had loved with every fiber of his being. The woman he had abandoned when the pressure became too great and the choice became impossible. She looked different, older, more refined, her natural beauty enhanced by the kind of quiet confidence that came from surviving storms. Her dark skin seemed to glow against the cream-colored blouse she wore, professional and elegant. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, revealing the graceful curve of her neck that he had once traced with his lips. But it was her eyes that undid him, those same warm brown eyes that had once looked at him with infinite love, now guarded and unreadable. And then his gaze dropped lower, to the gentle curve beneath her blazer that told a story he wasn't prepared to hear. She was pregnant. "Hello, Omar," Zara said quietly, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "I believe you're looking for an assistant." Omar's world, his carefully ordered, emotionally sterile world, tilted on its axis. The woman he had never stopped loving, despite years of trying to forget her, was sitting in his office, pregnant, applying to work for him. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 8 years of unspoken words, broken promises, and a love that had been sacrificed on the altar of family expectations and social pressure. Omar's throat felt constricted, his breathing shallow. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to call security, to maintain the boundaries that had kept him safe for so long. But he couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only stare at the woman who had once been his entire world and wonder what cruel twist of fate had brought her back into his life at this moment, in this way. Zara shifted slightly in her chair, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her stomach. The gesture was protective, maternal, and it sent a spike of something, fear, longing, through Omar's chest. "I have excellent references," she continued, her tone purely professional now, as if they were strangers meeting for the first time. 5 years of executive assistant experience, fluency in 4 languages, and a master's degree in business administration. I'm also extremely discreet and have no problem working long hours. Her words were perfectly pitched, the kind of presentation any hiring manager would appreciate. But Omar heard the subtext, the careful way she avoided any acknowledgement of their shared history. She was offering him a way out, a chance to pretend they had never meant anything to each other. The professional thing to do would be to end the interview immediately, to cite conflict of interest, to have HR handle her application, to maintain the safe distance that had protected him for 8 years. Instead, he found himself asking, "When can you start?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge neither had expected. Omar's question, "When can you start?" seemed to surprise him as much as it did Zara. For a moment, her composed facade flickered, revealing a flash of something that might have been relief, or perhaps fear. "Tomorrow, if needed," she replied, her voice maintaining that same professional tone, though Omar caught the slight tremor beneath it. "I understand the position requires immediate availability." Omar leaned back in his chair, trying to process the impossibility of the situation. Here was Zara Okafor, the woman whose absence had carved a hollow space in his chest that 8 years hadn't managed to fill, sitting across from him as if applying for any ordinary job. The rational part of his mind screamed warnings, conflict of interest, emotional complications, the potential for disaster. But a stronger part, a part he'd buried beneath layers of business deals and calculated decisions, whispered something else entirely. Second chances don't often announce themselves so clearly. "The salary is competitive," he found himself saying, pulling out a standard employment contract from his desk drawer. His hands moved automatically, going through the motions of a normal hiring process while his mind reeled. 60,000 annually, plus benefits and discretionary bonuses based on performance. Zara's eyebrows rose slightly. It was a generous offer, more generous than necessary for an assistant position, and they both knew it. But she didn't comment on the amount, simply nodded as if she'd expected nothing less. "The hours can be demanding," Omar continued, his voice growing steadier as he fell into familiar corporate rhythm. "I travel frequently, often with little notice. International calls at odd hours. Weekend work when deals require it." The previous assistant found the pace challenging. "I'm not the previous assistant," Zara said quietly, and for the first time since she'd walked into his office, her words carried a hint of the fire he remembered. The woman who had once stood up to his family's disapproval, who had fought for their relationship when he hadn't been strong enough to fight for it himself. Omar pushed the contract across the desk, careful not to let their fingers brush when she reached for it. "You'll need to sign standard confidentiality agreements. Everything that happens in this office, every meeting, every call, every document, it stays here. Absolute discretion is non-negotiable." As Zara reviewed the contract, Omar found himself studying her face, searching for clues about the 8 years that had passed between them. The girl he had known, impulsive, passionate, sometimes reckless in her honesty, had been replaced by this poised woman who handled his piercing stare without flinching. Life had taught her control, he realized, the same way it had taught him. But some things hadn't changed. The way she bit her lower lip when concentrating, the slight tilt of her head when she was thinking through a problem, the graceful movement of her hands as she turned the pages. "Mr. Rashid," she said, looking up from the contract, and the formal address hit him like cold water. "I want to be clear about something from the beginning." Omar tensed, preparing himself for the conversation he'd been dreading, the acknowledgement of their history, the messy emotional unpacking that would make this arrangement impossible. "I'm here to work," Zara continued, her tone businesslike. "I need this job, and I'm good at what I do, whatever personal history we might have is irrelevant to my ability to perform this role professionally. I hope we can agree on that." The relief Omar felt was almost overwhelming, followed immediately by something that might have been disappointment. She was offering him exactly what he thought he wanted: a clean slate, a professional relationship unencumbered by the past. So why did her words feel like a door closing instead of one opening? "Of course," he replied, matching her formal tone. "This is a business arrangement, nothing more." Zara signed the contract with smooth, confident strokes, her signature as composed as everything else about her. When she handed it back, Omar noticed she wasn't wearing a wedding ring. The observation sent an unwelcome jolt of something through his chest. Curiosity. Hope. He pushed the feeling away. "I'll have HR process your paperwork today," Omar said, sliding the signed contract into his desk drawer. "Your workstation will be set up in the outer office. You'll have access to my calendar, correspondence, and travel arrangements. I assume you're familiar with standard business software?" "Extensively," Zara confirmed. "I've also managed international communications and coordinated multi-city business travel. Language skills include Arabic, French, English, and conversational Portuguese. Omar remembered teaching her basic phrases during a weekend trip to Lisbon, back when the future had seemed full of possibilities instead of obstacles. The memory surfaced unbidden, and he found himself wondering if she remembered too, or if those moments had been edited out of her past the way he'd tried to edit them out of his. "Your first task will be organizing my calendar for the London meetings next week," Omar said, forcing himself back to the present. "There are also several contracts requiring review before the Singapore investors arrive on Friday. I'll need detailed briefings on all parties involved." "Understood." Zara gathered her purse, preparing to leave. As she stood, Omar caught another glimpse of her pregnancy, and questions he had no right to ask burned in his throat. How far along was she? Was she married? Was someone taking care of her? "Zara," he said before she could reach the door. Her name felt foreign on his tongue after years of silence, but also startlingly familiar, like a song he'd thought he'd forgotten. She turned back, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes, Mr. Rashid." The formal address stung, but he pushed through. Will you be able to handle the physical demands of the position, given your condition?" For a moment, her professional mask slipped, and he saw a flash of vulnerability that made his chest tighten. "I'm perfectly capable of doing my job," she said firmly. "My pregnancy doesn't affect my ability to work." "I didn't mean to imply." "I know what you meant." Her voice was steady, but there was steel beneath it. "And I appreciate the concern, but I'm not made of glass, Omar. I never was." The use of his first name hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement of their shared past, despite her earlier insistence on keeping things professional. Omar felt something shift inside him, a crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. "Of course not," he said quietly. "I'll see you tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp." After Zara left, Omar sat alone in his office, staring at the closed door through which she'd disappeared. The familiar space suddenly felt different, charged with possibilities and dangers he'd spent 8 years avoiding. He could call HR right. Now explain the situation. Have them reassign her to another department or rescind the offer entirely. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. Instead, he found himself opening his laptop and pulling up the London project files. If Zara was going to be his assistant, she'd need comprehensive briefings on every aspect of his business operations. The work would require long hours together, close collaboration, the kind of professional intimacy that would make maintaining emotional distance nearly impossible. But Omar Rashid hadn't built a $3 billion empire by shying away from challenging situations. He'd built it by identifying opportunities others missed, by taking calculated risks when the potential rewards justified the dangers. As he began compiling the briefing materials, Omar told himself this was just another business decision. Zara was qualified for the position, and he needed an assistant. Their personal history was irrelevant, a complication he was mature enough to handle professionally. He almost convinced himself it was true. The afternoon passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls, but Omar found his concentration fractured, his mind drifting to questions he had no business asking. Where had Zara been for the past 8 years? How had she ended up back in Cairo, applying for jobs in corporate towers? And most pressingly, whose child was she carrying? The last question bothered him more than it should have. Zara had moved on clearly. She'd built a life without him, found someone else, created the future he'd been too cowardly to offer her. The knowledge sat in his stomach like cold stone, a reminder of everything he'd given up in the name of family expectations and social propriety. His brother Tariq would laugh if he knew. After years of refusing every introduction, their mother, arranged after dismissing countless eligible women from prominent families, Omar had hired his ex-girlfriend as his personal assistant. The irony was almost poetic. By 6 o'clock, the office had emptied except for Omar and the cleaning crew. He usually worked until 8 or 9, losing himself in the familiar rhythms of business until exhaustion made sleep possible. But tonight, he found himself staring out at the Cairo skyline, wondering what Zara was doing, where she was living, whether she was alone. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. Tariq mentioned you hired a new assistant. Perhaps it's time we met for dinner. There's someone I'd like you to meet. Omar deleted the message without responding, just as he had with Tariq's earlier text. His family's matchmaking efforts had always felt pointless, but now they felt almost insulting. How could he explain that the woman he'd never stopped loving was carrying another man's child and would be sitting outside his office every morning? He couldn't explain it, because he barely understood it himself. As Omar finally gathered his things to leave, he found himself making a mental list of everything Zara would need to know about his business operations, his preferences, his schedule. Professional considerations, he told himself, nothing more. But as he walked through the empty office toward the elevators, Omar couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully ordered world was about to become very complicated indeed. Tomorrow, Zara would be back. Tomorrow, they would begin the delicate dance of working together while pretending their shared history didn't exist. Tomorrow, he would have to look into those familiar brown eyes and maintain the fiction that she was just another employee. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, carrying Omar down toward the parking garage, and whatever uncertain future awaited them both. The elevator climbed toward the 47th floor with mechanical precision, each floor marked by a soft chime that seemed to echo Zara's heartbeat. She clutched her leather portfolio tighter, reminding herself of the mantra that had gotten her through the past 8 years. Survive, adapt, overcome. But standing in Omar's elevator, breathing air scented with the same expensive cologne that used to linger on her skin, survival felt more complicated than it had in a very long time. The doors opened to reveal the executive floor in all its intimidating glory. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Cairo's sprawling metropolis, while sleek, modern furniture and abstract art created an atmosphere of wealth so refined it felt almost sterile. This was Omar's kingdom, and Zara was about to become a daily presence in it. Ms. Okafor, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and a nervous smile, approached. "I'm Layla from HR. Mr. Rashid asked me to show you to your workstation and handle your orientation." Zara nodded, following Layla through the open floor plan, where other employees worked quietly at their stations. She could feel their curious glances, the subtle assessment that came with being the new person in a tight-knit corporate environment. In a few hours, word would spread through the building. Omar Rashid had finally hired another assistant. Her workstation was positioned strategically outside Omar's office, close enough for immediate access, but separated by a glass partition that offered privacy while maintaining visual connection. The desk was state-of-the-art. Dual monitors, high-end computer, digital phone system with what appeared to be dozens of lines. "Your access codes," Layla said, handing her a sealed envelope. "Computer login, building security, Mr. Rashid's calendar. System, he's very particular about privacy, so these passwords change monthly. Never share them with anyone." As Layla walked her through the building's security protocols and emergency procedures, Zara found herself studying the glass wall that separated her from Omar's office. She could see him inside, already at his desk despite the early hour. His dark hair catching the morning light as he reviewed documents. He looked older than she remembered, not physically, but in the way he carried himself. There was a weariness in his posture that money and power hadn't been able to erase. "He's an early riser," Layla said, following her gaze. "Usually here by 7, sometimes earlier if he's taking calls from Asia. Coffee preferences are in your orientation packet, very specific about his morning routine." "How many assistants has he had?" Zara asked, trying to sound casual. Layla's expression grew carefully neutral. "Several. The position can be demanding. Mr. Rashid has high standards." The diplomatic response told Zara everything she needed to know. Omar had developed a reputation for being difficult to work with, cycling through assistants like a revolving door. The knowledge should have concerned her, but instead it sparked something that felt dangerously like protectiveness. The Omar she had known could be demanding, yes, but never cruel. If people couldn't work with him, perhaps they simply didn't understand him. "Your first task," Layla continued, checking her tablet, "is to familiarize yourself with Mr. Rashid's schedule for the next 2 weeks. There's a London trip that needs detailed coordination, and several high-priority meetings that will require advanced preparation." After Layla left, Zara settled at her desk and logged into Omar's calendar system. What she found made her slightly dizzy. Back-to-back meetings from dawn until well past normal business hours, conference calls with investors across multiple time zones, site visits to construction projects, legal consultations, and board meetings that could make or break million-dollar deals. It was the schedule of a man who used work as armor, who filled every moment to avoid the dangerous territory of quiet reflection. Zara recognized the pattern because she'd lived it herself, throwing herself into her career after everything fell apart. Her computer chimed with an instant message. "Please come in." Zara's pulse quickened. This was it. Their first professional interaction in 8 years. She smoothed her navy blazer, checked that her hair was still neatly pinned, and walked the few steps to Omar's office door. "Come in," his voice called before she could knock. Omar's office was even more impressive from the inside. The space was enormous, dominated by that imposing black granite desk and floor-to-ceiling windows that made the rest of Cairo look like a model spread out below. But what struck Zara most was how impersonal it felt, like a stage set designed to project power rather than a space where someone actually lived and worked. "Your calendar," she said, approaching his desk with professional confidence. "I've reviewed the next 2 weeks. The London meetings will require visa confirmations for your guests, hotel reservations at the Langham, and ground transportation. In coordination, I've also identified 3 potential scheduling conflicts that need resolution." Omar looked up from his documents, and for a moment, Zara saw surprise flicker across his features. He'd expected her to be competent, but perhaps not quite this competent. "Show me," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. For the next 30 minutes, they worked through his schedule with the kind of focused efficiency that Zara had perfected over years of executive support. She asked precise questions, offered practical solutions, and demonstrated an understanding of international business protocols that impressed even Omar. "The Singapore investors," she said, consulting. Her notes: "They'll expect a formal dinner, not just the business lunch currently scheduled. Cultural considerations, face-to-face relationship building is crucial for this demographic. I'd recommend the Nile Ritz-Carlton's private dining room." Omar leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You've done this before?" "Extensively," Zara replied. "My previous position involved coordinating international acquisitions for an investment firm. Different scale, but similar principles." "Which firm?" The question hung in the air between them, more personal than professional. Zara hesitated, recognizing the dangerous territory they were approaching. "Morgan and Associates," she said finally. "Based in London. I managed executive support for their Middle Eastern operations." London. Omar felt something twist in his chest. She'd been in London, his favorite city for business, a place he visited monthly. They'd potentially been in the same city dozens of times over the past 8 years, moving through parallel lives that never intersected. "Why did you leave?" he asked, then immediately regretted the question. Too personal, too revealing of his curiosity about her life. Zara's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, a gesture so brief Omar almost missed it. "Personal reasons," she said simply. "I needed to return to Cairo. The pregnancy. Of course, she'd come home to have her baby, to be near family or the father." Omar felt that familiar cold stone settle in his stomach again. "The London meetings," he said, forcing himself back to business. "You'll need to coordinate with my legal team here and our partners there. The contracts are complex, several hundred pages of documentation that needs to be thoroughly reviewed before I arrive." "I'll have everything prepared," Zara assured him. "Summaries, key points highlighted, potential concerns flagged for your attention." They spent another hour going through various projects, and Omar found himself impressed despite his emotional turmoil. Zara had developed into exactly the kind of assistant he needed: intelligent, proactive, capable of anticipating problems before they became crises. More than that, she understood the subtleties of his communication style, picking up on implications and preferences without requiring detailed explanation. It should have been perfect. It should have made this arrangement easy. Instead, it made everything infinitely more complicated. "There's one more thing," Omar said, as Zara prepared to leave. "The quarterly board meeting is next month. You'll need to prepare comprehensive reports on all our major investments, coordinate with department heads, and manage the logistics for 32 board members from 7 countries. Zara nodded, making notes. "Timeline for preparation." 3 weeks. "Challenging, but manageable," she said, then looked up at him directly for the first time since entering his office. "I should mention I'll need some accommodation for medical appointments in the coming months. Nothing that should interfere with major deadlines, but I wanted you to be aware." The reminder of her pregnancy hit Omar like a physical blow. Here she was, carrying another man's child, efficiently managing his professional life while her own body was creating new life. The intimacy of it, knowing she was pregnant while working so closely with him, felt almost unbearable. Of course, he managed. Whatever you need. After Zara left his office, Omar found himself staring at the closed door, trying to process the morning's revelations. She was everything he needed professionally. Competent, experienced, unflappable under pressure. But personally, working with her was going to be torture. Every gesture reminded him of the woman he'd fallen in love with. Every competent solution to his business problems reminded him that she'd grown and evolved without him. And every unconscious touch to her stomach reminded him that someone else had claimed the future he'd been too cowardly to fight for. His phone buzzed with an intercom call from Zara. "Mr. Rashid, I have the Singapore investors online too. They're calling earlier than scheduled due to the time difference." Her voice was crisp, professional, efficient, perfect. "Put them through," Omar said, forcing himself to focus on business. But as he took the call, he found himself watching Zara through the glass partition, noting the graceful way she moved, the focused concentration as she worked at her computer, the occasional gentle touch to her growing belly. This was going to be the longest job of his life. 3 weeks into their professional arrangement, Omar had developed a routine that felt both natural and torturous. Every morning at precisely 7:45, he would hear the soft click of Zara's heels on the marble floor as she arrived at her desk. The sound had become his unofficial alarm clock, more reliable than any meeting reminder or phone notification. From his office, he could observe her morning ritual through the glass partition. She would set down her leather bag, check the overnight messages on her phone, and begin the day by reviewing his calendar for potential changes or conflicts. Her efficiency was remarkable. By the time he was ready for his first coffee, she had already reorganized his schedule to accommodate 3 urgent calls from European investors and rescheduled a site visit that conflicted with a newly announced board meeting. But it was the small, unguarded moments that undid him. The way she would pause sometimes, her hand resting on her lower back as she stood from her desk. The careful way she navigated around sharp corners, protecting her growing belly. The afternoon ritual of herbal tea instead of coffee, a change that spoke to maternal instincts Omar had no right to notice. On this particular Thursday morning, everything changed. Omar was reviewing construction reports when he heard an unusual sound from Zara's desk, a sharp intake of breath, followed by the scrape of her chair being pushed back quickly. He looked up to see her standing beside her desk, one hand pressed to her stomach, her face pale with concern. Without thinking, he was out of his chair and through his office door before conscious thought could stop him. Zara. Her name escaped. Him before he could catch it, dropping the formal Ms. Okafor they'd maintained for 3 weeks. She looked up at him, and for the first time since she'd walked back into his life, her professional composure cracked completely. "I think I need to sit down," she said quietly, her voice tight with worry. Omar was beside her in 3 strides, his hand hovering near her elbow without quite touching. "What's wrong? Should I call someone?" "It's probably nothing," Zara said, but she allowed him to guide her to the small seating area near the windows. "Just some cramping. It happens sometimes." The words, "it happens sometimes," sent a chill through Omar that had nothing to do with the office's air conditioning. He'd never been around a pregnant woman before, had no frame of reference for what was normal versus what was cause for alarm. But the worried look in Zara's eyes told him this wasn't routine. "Your doctor," he said, pulling out his phone. "What's the number? I'll call them right now." "Omar, I'm fine." "You're not fine." The words came out sharper than he intended, fueled by a protective instinct that surprised them both. "You're pale, you're scared, and you just said you're having cramping. That doesn't sound fine to me." For a moment they stared at each other, the professional distance they'd so carefully maintained evaporating in the face of real concern. This wasn't CEO and assistant. This was two people who had once meant everything to each other, and one of them was potentially in trouble. "Dr. Farah's clinic," Zara said finally, giving him the number. "But she's probably busy, and I don't want to overreact." "Let me worry about overreacting," Omar said, already dialing. When the clinic's receptionist answered, his voice carried the kind of authority that moved mountains and rearranged schedules. "This is Omar Rashid. I need to speak with Dr. Farah immediately regarding her patient, Zara Okafor. It's urgent." While they waited for the doctor to come to the phone, Omar found himself studying Zara's face, noting every nuance of her expression, the worry lines around her eyes, the way she was breathing carefully, as if testing each breath, the protective way her hands curved around her belly. "Dr. Farah?" Omar said when the call connected. "I'm calling about Zara Okafor. She's experiencing some cramping and appears to be in discomfort. Yes, I'll put her on." He handed Zara a phone, then retreated a few steps to give her privacy while staying close enough to hear her responses. Her answers were clipped, clinical. "About 20 minutes ago. Lower abdomen, moderate intensity. No bleeding. Yes, I've been staying hydrated." When she hung up, Omar was immediately beside her again. "What did she say?" "She wants to see me today, just to be safe," Zara replied, and Omar could hear the effort it took for her to keep her voice steady. "Probably nothing serious, but given my history—" She stopped abruptly, as if realizing she'd revealed more than intended. Omar felt something cold settle in his chest. "Your history?" he asked gently. Zara looked away, her hands tightening protectively over her stomach. "I had some complications with the previous pregnancy, lost the baby at 6 months. Dr. Farah just wants to be cautious." The words hit Omar like a physical blow. Zara had been pregnant before, had lost a child, had endured that kind of grief while he was building his empire and telling himself he'd made the right choice 8 years ago. "I'll drive you," he said immediately. "Omar, that's not necessary. It's not a request." His voice carried the same tone he used in boardrooms when a decision was final. "Cancel my meetings for the rest of the day. I'm taking you to the doctor." "You can't just cancel everything. The London investors, the Singapore contracts, can wait." Omar was already pulling out his phone, sending rapid-fire messages to his department heads. "Hassan can handle the London call. The Singapore review isn't due until Monday. Nothing on my calendar is more important than making sure you and your baby are okay." The words hung between them, heavy with implications neither was prepared to address. Omar had just prioritized Zara's well-being over multi-million-dollar business deals, dropping his professional distance completely in favor of raw, protective concern. "Why?" Zara asked softly, and the question carried 8 years of unspoken hurt. "Why do you care?" Omar stopped typing, his phone forgotten in his hands. How could he explain that her pain was his pain? That the thought of her suffering alone was unbearable? That despite everything that had happened between them, despite the years of silence and the walls they'd built, she was still written into his DNA in a way that no amount of time or distance could erase? "Because," he said finally, meeting her eyes, "you're not alone anymore." The drive to Dr. Farah's clinic passed in tense silence. Omar's driver navigated Cairo's chaotic traffic with practiced efficiency, while Omar stole glances at Zara in the back seat. She sat perfectly still, her breathing controlled, but he could see the anxiety in the rigid line of her shoulders. At the clinic, Omar paced the waiting room like a caged animal, while Zara underwent her examination. The walls were decorated with cheerful posters about prenatal care and happy families, images that seemed to mock his current state of helpless worry. He'd faced hostile takeovers and billion-dollar negotiations with less stress than he felt sitting in this pastel-colored room, waiting for news about a woman who wasn't supposed to matter to him anymore. When Zara finally emerged from the examination room, Omar was on his feet instantly, searching her face for clues. "Everything's fine," she said quickly, relief evident in her voice. "False alarm. Dr. Farah says it's normal for this stage of pregnancy, especially given my previous experience. Just stress and too many long hours." Omar felt his knees go, weak with relief. "Thank God," he breathed, then caught himself. "I mean, that's good news. Professional standpoint. Can't have my assistant out sick." Zara raised an eyebrow at his obvious deflection, but didn't call him on it. Instead, she said, "Dr. Farah wants me to reduce my working hours. No more than 8 hours a day, regular breaks, less stress." "Done," Omar said immediately. "Whatever you need." "Omar, be realistic. Your schedule alone requires, then we'll adjust my schedule." He was already calculating, mentally reorganizing his professional life around her needs. More morning meetings, condensed travel, delegation to department heads. It's not negotiable. As they walked back to his car, Zara stopped suddenly on the sidewalk. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, echoing her earlier question. "Really? Don't give me some corporate answer about employee wellness or liability concerns. Why do you care about my baby?" Omar looked at her standing there in the late afternoon sunlight, her hand resting protectively on her stomach, her eyes demanding honesty after 3 weeks of careful professional distance. For a moment, he considered lying, considered retreating back to the safe territory of business concerns and legal protocols. But the terror he'd felt in those 30 minutes, not knowing if she and her baby were okay, had stripped away his carefully constructed defenses. "Because," he said quietly, 8 years ago, I walked away from the best thing that ever happened to me. I won't walk away again." The confession hung between them on the busy Cairo street, cars honking and people rushing past, oblivious to the moment that was reshaping 2 lives that had been moving in careful parallel for too long. Zara stared at him, her eyes wide with surprise and something that might have been hope. "Omar, I know it's complicated," he said quickly. "I know you're with someone else now, building a life that doesn't include me, but I can't pretend I don't care about what happens to you. I tried for 8 years, and I failed spectacularly." "You think I'm with someone else?" Zara's voice was soft, confused. Omar gestured toward her stomach. "The baby is mine," Zara said simply. "Just mine." The words hit Omar like lightning, illuminating everything he'd assumed and revealing how wrong he'd been. Zara was single. The baby was hers alone, which meant everything he thought he knew about their situation had just changed. Completely. The silence in Omar's car stretched like a taut wire as they drove back toward the office. Zara's revelation that the baby was just hers had shifted the entire foundation of everything Omar thought he understood. His mind raced with questions he didn't know how to ask, implications he wasn't sure he was ready to face. "Omar," Zara said quietly as they stopped at a red light, "we need to talk, really talk, not as employer and employee." He nodded, his throat suddenly dry. "My apartment is 5 minutes from here. It's private." 20 minutes later, they stood in Omar's penthouse living room, the same space where he'd spent countless sleepless nights over the past 8 years, wondering what had become of the woman. Now standing by his floor-to-ceiling windows, the apartment was a reflection of his emotional state, beautiful but cold, expensive but empty. Everything perfectly arranged except for the gaping hole where warmth should have been. "You never married," Zara observed, noting the absence of any feminine touches, family photos, or signs of shared life. "No," Omar said simply. "Did you?" No. She turned from the window to face him, her hands folded protectively over her stomach. There was someone, for a while, in London, James. We were together for 3 years. Omar felt that familiar spike of jealousy, even though he had no right to it. What happened? He wanted children eventually. I wanted them immediately. Zara's voice was matter of fact, but Omar caught the underlying pain. After what happened with my first pregnancy, I felt like time was running out. James thought we should wait until his career was more established, until we had more money saved, until life was perfect. And you couldn't wait. I'd already waited too long for too many things. The words carried weight that went beyond her relationship with James. When I turned 35, I made a decision. If I was going to have a child, I was going to have one, with or without him. Omar sat heavily on his leather sofa, processing this information. So you chose a donor, went through IVF, got pregnant on the second try. Zara moved to sit across from him, maintaining distance, but no longer hiding behind professional formality. James couldn't handle it, called it selfish, reckless, said I was trying to force him into fatherhood. And that's when you left London. That's when he left me. Zara's laugh was bitter. Apparently dating a woman who gets pregnant without consulting you is too complicated for some men. Who knew? Omar flinched at the indirect accusation, knowing he'd earned it. 8 years ago, he'd walked away from Zara when she was pregnant with his child because his family's disapproval had been too complicated for him to handle. The parallel was unmistakable. The baby you lost, he said carefully, was it yours? The word hit the room like a thunderclap. I was 6 months pregnant with your son when I miscarried. Omar felt the world tilt beneath him. A son. They'd had a son together, and he'd never known, never had the chance to hold him, to love him, to be the father he should have been. His name was Adam, Zara continued, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. I named him after your grandfather, the one you told me about, the one who taught you to play chess. Zara. Omar's voice broke completely. He buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed by grief for a child he'd never known existed, and guilt for not being there when Zara needed him most. I almost called you, she said softly. When it happened, I was in the hospital, alone, and all I wanted was for you to be there. But then I remembered that you'd made your choice. Your family's approval was more important than our family. I was a coward, Omar whispered, looking up at her through his tears. I was a selfish, weak coward, and I've regretted it every day since. I know. Zara wiped her own tears with the back of her hand. But regret doesn't change anything, Omar. It doesn't bring Adam back. It doesn't erase 8 years of silence. They sat in the growing twilight of Omar's sterile apartment, two people who had loved each other completely and lost everything that mattered in the process. The weight of their shared grief and separate journeys filled the space between them like a living thing. Why did you come back to Cairo? Omar asked finally. Why now, when you could have built a life anywhere? Because this baby deserves to. Know where she comes from. Zara's hand moved to her stomach, protective and sure. I found out I'm having a daughter, and I realized I didn't want her to grow up the way I did after my parents died, rootless, disconnected from her heritage. Cairo is my home, even if it's complicated. She? Omar repeated, focusing on that detail. You're having a daughter? In about 4 months. Zara's smile was soft, maternal, transformative. I'm scared out of my mind, but also more excited than I've ever been about anything. Omar watched her face as she talked about her daughter, seeing a glow that had nothing to do with pregnancy hormones and everything to do with pure love. This was what he'd stolen from her 8 years ago. The chance to share this joy with someone who cared, the chance to build a family together. The job, he said suddenly, understanding flooding through him. You didn't just randomly apply to work for me. You knew I was hiring. I needed work, and I heard through the business community that Omar Rashid was impossible to work for, cycling through assistants like tissues. Zara's expression grew determined. I figured if anyone could handle impossible, it was someone who'd already survived loving you and losing everything. The brutal honesty of her words should have stung, but instead, Omar felt something like admiration. She'd walked back into his life deliberately, knowing exactly what she was getting into, not for reconciliation, not for closure, but for practical reasons. She needed a job, and she was uniquely qualified to handle his difficult personality. Now, he asked, what happens now that we've said all this? Zara stood up, smoothing her skirt with hands that weren't quite steady. Now I go home. Tomorrow I come back to work. You have a conference call with the Sydney team at 8 a.m., lunch with the Minister of Development at noon, and a site visit to the new capital project at 3. Zara, this doesn't change anything professionally, Omar. Her voice had shifted back toward business mode, but the tremor beneath it betrayed her emotional state. I still need this job. You still need an assistant who can handle your schedule without falling apart. What happened between us, what we lost, that's separate from what we're doing now. Omar stood as well, every instinct screaming at him to fight this dismissal, to refuse to let her walk away again. But he'd forfeited the right to make demands 8 years ago. For what it's worth, he said as she gathered her purse, I'm sorry for Adam, for leaving you alone, for 8 years of cowardice. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to know. Zara paused at his door, her hand on the handle. I know you are, she said without turning around. But sorry doesn't give me back my son Omar, and it doesn't protect this daughter from growing up with a father who runs when things get complicated. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Omar alone with the echoes of truths that changed everything and nothing at all. Outside his windows, Cairo sparkled in the darkness. $3 billion worth of empire sprawling beneath him. But for the first time in 8 years, Omar understood with perfect clarity that he would trade every building, every investment, every zero in his bank account for the chance to undo the worst decision of his life. The chance to be the man Zara had needed him to be. The chance to be the father Adam had deserved. The chance to be part of the family he'd thrown away in favor of other people's expectations. As he stood in his empty apartment, Omar realized that some mistakes echo across decades, shaping not just the lives they destroy, but the lives that might have been. The following Monday morning arrived with the weight of unspoken truths settling between them like fog. Omar sat at his desk, pretending to review quarterly projections, while actually watching Zara through the glass partition as she efficiently managed his phone calls and coordinated his schedule. She looked composed, professional, untouchable, as if their conversation in his apartment had never happened. But Omar could see the subtle changes, the way she held herself more carefully, as if carrying something fragile, the deliberate distance she maintained, no longer stepping into his office, unless absolutely necessary. The protective wall she'd rebuilt overnight, higher and stronger than before. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Rashid, you have Minister Hassan on line 3 regarding the new capital development permits. Thank you, Ms. Okafor. The formal names felt like glass shards on his tongue, but this was the game they were playing now, professional courtesy masking personal devastation. The morning passed in a blur of calls and meetings, Omar going through the motions while his mind replayed every word from their conversation. Adam. Their son's name had been Adam. Omar had never even known he existed. never had the chance to love him or lose him or grieve him properly. At noon, his calendar showed lunch with Dr. Mahmoud Farid, the city's leading architect and an old family friend. Omar had been looking forward to the meeting. They were discussing a revolutionary sustainable housing project that could transform Cairo's housing crisis. But as Dr. Farid settled into the restaurant's private dining room, Omar found his thoughts scattered. "You seem distracted, my friend," Dr. Farid observed over their appetizers. "Business troubles?" "Personal complications," Omar replied. Then, immediately regretted the admission. He'd spent years maintaining perfect separation between his professional and private lives. "Ah!" Dr. Farid's knowing smile carried decades of friendship. "I wondered when someone would finally crack that armor of yours. Your mother mentioned you hired a new assistant. She's hoping this one might last longer than the others." Omar nearly choked on his water. "My mother mentioned my assistant!" "Your mother mentions everything about you, Omar. She's convinced you're working yourself to death to avoid dealing with whatever's really bothering you." Dr. Farid leaned forward conspiratorially. "Between you and me, she's not wrong." The conversation shifted to safer territory: construction timelines, environmental regulations, budget considerations. But Omar's mind kept drifting. When they discussed the housing project's focus on supporting single mothers and their children, Omar felt something twist in his chest. Zara would be a single mother soon, raising her daughter alone because the men in her life, both James and Omar himself, had failed her when it mattered most. After lunch, Omar returned to the office to find Zara standing beside her desk, one hand pressed to her lower back, the other holding a file of documents. She was breathing carefully, the way pregnant women did when dealing with discomfort they couldn't quite escape. "The Singapore contracts need your review," she said without preamble, extending the file toward him. Omar noticed the slight tremor in her hand, the way she shifted her weight to accommodate her changing body. 5 months pregnant, carrying a daughter she'd planned for and wanted desperately, working for a man who reminded her daily of everything she'd lost. "Sit down," he said, reaching for the file. "Please." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're pregnant and exhausted and trying to pretend that maintaining perfect professionalism with me isn't taking everything you have." The words came out sharper than he intended, fueled by frustration at their impossible situation. Zara's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "Don't! Don't what? Don't pretend you care about my well-being when what you really care about is your own guilt." Her voice was quiet but cutting. "Don't use my pregnancy as an excuse to play hero when you walked away from the last one." The accusation hung between them like a slap. Omar felt every word land, each one deserved and devastating. "You're right," he said quietly, "but that doesn't change the fact that you need to sit down and take care of yourself." "Why?" Zara's composure finally cracked, revealing the anger she'd been carrying for 8 years. "So you can feel better about yourself? So you can pretend you're protecting this baby the way you didn't protect Adam?" Omar flinched as if she'd struck him. "Zara, no." She stepped closer, her eyes blazing with fury and pain. "You don't get to be concerned about my daughter, Omar. You don't get to worry about my health or my comfort or my well-being. You gave up that right when you chose your family's approval over our family." "I know that," Omar said, his voice raw. "I know I have no right to care, but I do care, and I can't turn that off just because it's inconvenient for both of us." "Then learn to live with it," Zara snapped. "Because this is my life now, my job, my pregnancy, my choices. You're just the man who signs my paychecks." She turned to walk back to her desk, but Omar caught her arm gently. "Wait, please." The touch was electric, sending shockwaves through both of them. For a moment they were transported back 8 years to when touching each other was natural, necessary, as essential as breathing. "I need to know," Omar said quietly. "Adam, what happened?" Was he... did he suffer? Zara's anger deflated, replaced by the old grief she carried like a stone in her chest. "No," she whispered. "It was peaceful. The doctor said he just stopped growing. There was no pain." "Where is he buried?" The question seemed to surprise her. "Greenwood Cemetery. The International section. I bought a plot big enough for a family, thinking someday..." Omar nodded, filing the information away. Someday, when he found the courage, he would visit his son's grave. Someday, when he could face the magnitude of what he'd lost without falling apart completely. "The Singapore contracts," Zara said, stepping back and rebuilding her professional composure with visible effort. "They need your signature by 5 p.m. Omar took the hint, accepting the return to business, even though every instinct screamed at him to keep talking, to break down every wall between them, until they could figure out how to exist in the same space without constantly reopening old wounds. The afternoon limped along with both of them, hyper-aware of each other's presence, while pretending to focus solely on work. Omar found himself noticing things he had no business noticing, the way Zara unconsciously rubbed her stomach when she was thinking, the soft smile that crossed her face when she answered calls from what sounded like her doctor's office, the careful way she maneuvered around the office furniture. At 4:30, Zara knocked on his doorframe. "Mr. Rashid, your brother Tariq is here to see you. I told him you were busy, but he insisted." Omar looked up to see Tariq striding through the office with his usual confident grin, designer suit impeccable, expensive watch catching the afternoon light. At 35, Tariq was everything their parents had wanted in a son. Charming, socially connected, safely married to a woman from an appropriate family with 2 children who carried on the family name without complications. "Brother!" Tariq embraced Omar warmly, then turned his attention to Zara with obvious curiosity. "And you must be the famous assistant who's finally managed to tame my impossible older brother." Omar tensed, watching for Zara's reaction. To her credit, she maintained perfect professional composure. "Zara Okafor," she said, extending her hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Rashid." "The pleasure is entirely mine," Tariq replied, his charm turned up to full wattage. I was beginning to think Omar had given up on human interaction entirely. "I'll leave you two to talk," Zara said diplomatically, but Tariq waved her back. "Please don't let me interrupt. I'm just here to drag my workaholic brother away from his desk for dinner. Our mother is threatening intervention if he doesn't appear at family gatherings soon." Omar saw Zara's slight flinch at the mention of family, the reminder of the world that had once rejected her completely, the world that had cost them everything. "Perhaps another time," Omar said carefully. "I have work to finish." "Nonsense," Tariq replied. "Surely your capable assistant can handle things for one evening?" He turned to Zara with an expectant smile. "I'm sure you understand the importance of work-life balance, especially in your condition." The casual reference to her pregnancy made Zara stiffen almost imperceptibly. Omar felt his protective instincts flare, remembering how his family had once looked at her as an inconvenience, a complication, something to be managed and removed. "My condition doesn't affect my ability to work," Zara said coolly, and Omar heard the steel beneath her polite tone. "Of course not," Tariq backtracked quickly, but the damage was done. "I simply meant that pregnant women deserve extra consideration. Ms. Okafor receives all the consideration she's earned through her exceptional work," Omar said firmly, his voice carrying a warning his brother was smart enough to recognize. After Tariq left, with promises extracted for Sunday dinner that Omar had no intention of keeping, the office fell into uncomfortable silence. Zara busied herself with filing, while Omar pretended to review documents, both of them acutely aware of the landmines Tariq's visit had exposed. "Your family hasn't changed," Zara said finally, not looking up from her filing. "No," Omar agreed. Quietly. They haven't, and you still let them control your life. The accusation stung because it was partially true. Omar had spent 8 years building his empire, partly to prove his independence from his family's expectations, but he'd never fully broken free. He still showed up for obligatory dinners, still endured his mother's matchmaking attempts, still carried the weight of their disappointment whenever he failed to meet their standards. "Some things are harder to change than others," he said lamely. Zara finally looked at him, her eyes filled with something that might have been pity. "No, Omar. Some things you choose not to change because changing them would require courage you don't have." With that devastating assessment, she gathered her things and left for the day, leaving Omar alone with the truth he'd been avoiding for 8 years. He was still the same coward who had chosen family approval over love. Still, the man who let other people's expectations dictate his choices. But as he watched Zara's silhouette disappear into the elevator, Omar realized something else. He was tired of being that man. Tired of letting fear and obligation steal every chance at happiness that came his way. The question was whether he had the strength to change, or if some patterns were too deeply ingrained to break. The crash came on a Wednesday morning in November, 6 weeks after Tariq's office visit had exposed the fault lines in their carefully constructed professional relationship. Omar arrived at his usual time to find Zara's desk empty, her computer dark, her chair pushed neatly under her workspace as if she'd never been there at all. By 8:15, his first conference call was starting without the briefing materials Zara always prepared. By 8:30, he'd missed 2 important calls because he didn't know the international dial-in codes she managed. By 9, Omar was standing at her empty desk, staring at the neat stack of files she'd left behind and fighting down a panic that had nothing to do with business logistics. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "In hospital. Emergency. Will call when able." Omar's blood turned to ice. The baby. Something was wrong with the baby. He was in his car within 5 minutes, his driver navigating Cairo's morning traffic with reckless efficiency, while Omar called every major hospital in the city. On the 4th try, he found her. "Zara Okafor, admitted this morning," the nurse confirmed. "Are you family?" "I'm—" Omar hesitated, the question cutting deeper than it should have. "I'm her employer, emergency contact." The lie came easily, but it felt like swallowing glass. He wasn't her emergency contact. He wasn't her family. He was just the man who'd failed her twice and had no right to be racing through hospital corridors with his heart in his throat. He found her in the maternity ward, looking small and fragile in the hospital bed, an IV line snaking from her arm, and monitors beeping softly around her. Her face was pale but determined, and when she saw him in the doorway, her expression shifted to something between surprise and resignation. "You came," she said quietly. "Of course I came." Omar moved carefully into the room, as if his presence might somehow make things worse. "What happened? Is the baby—" "She's fine," Zara said quickly, one hand moving protectively to her rounded belly. "Scare with my blood pressure. Dr. Farah wants to keep me overnight for observation, but everything's stable now." Relief flooded through Omar so powerfully he had to grip the back of the visitor's chair to stay upright. "Thank God," he breathed. "You don't have to stay," Zara said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I know you have meetings." "Forget the meetings." Omar pulled the chair closer to her bed and sat down, his eyes never leaving her face. "Tell me what happened." For the next hour, Zara explained the morning's events, waking up with a severe headache, dizziness that wouldn't subside, the moment of panic when she realized something was seriously wrong. She'd called a taxi to the hospital, handled the admission paperwork alone, endured the testing and prodding while waiting for results that could have meant losing another baby. I kept thinking about Adam, she admitted, her voice barely above. A whisper about how I lost him, and whether I was going to lose her too, whether I was somehow cursed to never be a mother. "You're not cursed," Omar said fiercely. "You're going to be an incredible mother. This baby is lucky to have you." "Am I?" Zara's laugh was hollow. "I'm 36 years old, single, working a stressful job for a man who—" She trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. "A man who what?" Omar prompted gently. "A man who reminds me every day of everything I've lost." The words came out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them back for weeks. "Do you know how hard it is, Omar? Sitting outside your office, managing your life, pretending we're strangers when you're the father of the baby I lost. When you're the only man I ever truly loved." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. Omar felt his carefully constructed walls crumbling, 8 years of distance and professional pretense collapsing under the weight of her honesty. "Zara, I came back to Cairo because I thought I could handle it," she continued, tears streaming down her face now. "I thought I was strong enough to work for you, to see you every day, to pretend my heart didn't break a little more each time. You called me Ms. Okafor, like I was just another employee. Then why did you stay?" Omar asked, his own voice thick with emotion. "Why put yourself through that?" "Because leaving you once nearly destroyed me. Leaving you again felt impossible." Zara wiped her tears with a trembling hand. "But staying is destroying me too. Slowly, every day, watching you live this empty life, and knowing I can't be part of it." Omar reached for her hand before he could stop himself, their fingers intertwining like they had countless times 8 years ago. "It doesn't have to be empty," he said quietly. "My life doesn't have to be empty." "Yes, it does." Zara's voice was sad but certain. "Because you'll always choose the safe path, Omar. You'll always pick what other people expect over what your heart wants. And I can't watch you do that again. What if I didn't?" The words escaped before Omar could think them through. "What if I chose differently this time? Then you'd be a different man than the one I fell in love with." Zara squeezed his hand, gently, then let go. "And you'd definitely be a different man than the one who spent 8 years building walls instead of bridges." A soft knock interrupted them, and Dr. Farah entered with a warm smile and a clipboard full of test results. "Good afternoon, Zara. I see you have a visitor." "Dr. Farah, this is Omar Rashid, my employer," Zara said, slipping back into professional mode despite her tears. "Ah, the famous workaholic," Dr. Farah said with a knowing look. "I've been telling Zara for weeks that she needs to reduce her stress levels. High-pressure jobs and high-risk pregnancies don't mix well." "High risk?" Omar's attention sharpened. "I thought you said everything was fine." "The baby is fine," Dr. Farah clarified, "but Zara's medical history puts her in a higher risk category. The blood pressure spike today was a warning. She needs rest, reduced hours, and significantly less stress." "Whatever she needs," Omar said. "Immediately. Modified schedule, remote work, reduced responsibilities." "Omar, stop." Zara's voice was tired but firm. "You can't fix this with corporate accommodations." "Then tell me how to fix it," Omar said desperately. "Tell me what you need." Zara looked at him for a long moment, her expression infinitely sad. "I need you to let me go." The words hit Omar like a physical blow. "What?" "I'm resigning. Effective. Immediately. Dr. Farah is putting me on bed rest for the remainder of my pregnancy. Even if she wasn't, I can't keep doing this." Zara's voice grew stronger, more determined. "I can't keep working for you and pretending we don't have a history. I can't keep loving you while you live your life for other people. Zara, please, I'll submit my formal resignation letter tomorrow. Hassan can handle your schedule until you find a replacement. She turned her attention to Dr. Farah, effectively dismissing him. Doctor, when can I go home? As Dr. Farah explained, discharge procedures and follow-up appointments, Omar sat in stunned silence. Zara was leaving, again, and this time it wasn't his family's pressure or social expectations forcing the choice. It was his own failure to be brave enough for love. When Dr. Farah left, Omar made one last desperate attempt. What if I resigned? Instead, what if I walked away from all of it? The company, the family expectations, all of it. Then you'd resent me for the rest of your life, Zara said sadly. And I'd spend the rest of mine wondering if you only chose me because you felt guilty about Adam. That's not, isn't it? Zara's eyes were clear, certain. Can you honestly tell me that guilt over our son isn't driving every protective instinct you feel toward this baby? That your concern for my health isn't really about trying to save the child you couldn't save before? Omar opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it again. Because buried beneath his love for Zara, beneath his genuine concern for her well-being, there was indeed a desperate need to protect this pregnancy in a way he hadn't been able to protect their first. I thought so, Zara said gently. Omar, I've forgiven you for Adam. I forgave you years ago. But I won't let guilt masquerade as love. I won't let you sacrifice your life out of obligation. And I won't put my daughter in a situation where she grows up feeling like she's a consolation prize for the brother she never met. The truth of her words was devastating in its clarity. Omar realized he'd been so focused on his regret over the past that he hadn't honestly examined his motivations for the present. Go home, Omar, Zara said softly. Go back to your empire, your family dinners, your safe choices. Be the man you've always been. Just be him somewhere I don't have to. Watch. Omar stood slowly, feeling like he was walking away from his last chance at happiness. At the door, he turned back. For what it's worth, he said quietly, loving you was the only brave thing I ever did, even if I wasn't brave enough to keep doing it. As he walked away from Zara's hospital room, Omar realized that some endings don't come with dramatic confrontations or angry words. Sometimes they come with quiet resignation and the terrible clarity of knowing that love isn't always enough to overcome the patterns that define us. But even as he accepted this ending, a small part of his mind was already asking a different question. What if it didn't have to be the end? What if there was still time to become the man who deserved her love instead of just the man who felt guilty for losing it? 3 months passed like seasons of grief. Omar threw himself into work with a desperation that worried even his most dedicated employees. 18-hour days became normal. Weekend site visits to construction projects stretched into overnight trips. Board meetings multiplied as if he could bury his heartbreak beneath spreadsheets and profit margins. But on quiet Sunday mornings, when Cairo's chaos settled into something resembling peace, Omar found himself driving to Greenwood Cemetery. He'd started visiting Adam's grave 2 weeks after Zara resigned. The headstone was simple, elegant. Adam Rashid Okafor, beloved son, too beautiful for earth. Below it, Zara had carved a line in Arabic that translated to, "Until we meet again in gardens of peace." Each visit, Omar brought something different. Sometimes flowers, white roses that reminded him of Zara's favorite perfume. Sometimes he just sat on the small stone bench Zara had placed nearby and talked to his son about the father he'd failed to be, the choices he'd made, the love he'd thrown away. It was during one of these visits that Omar's phone rang with news that would change everything. "Mr. Rashid?" The voice was unfamiliar, nervous. "This is Nurse Amira from Cairo Medical Center. We have Zara Okafor listed as your employee and you as her emergency contact." Omar's blood turned to ice. "What's happened?" "She's in labor, sir. Emergency delivery at 36 weeks. She's asking for you." Omar was in his car before the nurse finished speaking, his driver racing through Sunday afternoon traffic while Omar's mind reeled. 36 weeks, a month early, emergency delivery. The words echoed with terrifying familiarity. Memories of another pregnancy that had ended in loss and grief. But this time would be different. This time he wouldn't be absent. This time he would be the man Zara and her daughter deserved, regardless of whether he still had the right to be there. The maternity ward was a flurry of controlled chaos when Omar arrived. He found Dr. Farah in scrubs, washing her hands at a sink outside the delivery room. "Omar," she said, surprised, "I didn't expect to see you here. How is she? How's the baby?" "Zara's strong, but it's been a difficult labor. The baby's in some distress. We need to deliver her now." Dr. Farah studied his face. "She asked for you specifically. Said if anything happened to her, she wanted you to make sure her daughter knew about her brother." The weight of that responsibility hit Omar like a physical blow. Zara was trusting him with her most precious legacy, the story of Adam, the connection between her children, the love that had survived everything they'd been through. "Can I see her? She's about to go into surgery for an emergency C-section. 5 minutes, no more." Omar entered the pre-operative room to find Zara on a gurney, an oxygen mask over her face, her eyes wide with fear and determination. When she saw him, tears spilled down her cheeks. "You came," she whispered as he approached. "Of course I came." Omar reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining with desperate familiarity. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Zara admitted. "But ready to meet her. I've been talking to her about her big brother, telling her how much he's going to love watching over her." Omar felt his throat close with emotion. Even in her moment of fear, Zara was thinking about Adam, keeping his memory alive for the sister, who would never meet him. "Zara," Omar said urgently, sensing they were running out of time, "I need you to know something. These past 3 months, I've been visiting Adam's grave." Her eyes widened in surprise. "I talk to him," Omar continued. "I tell him about his sister, about how brave his mother is, about how sorry I am that I wasn't there to love him. And I realize something." "What?" Zara's voice was barely audible. "I realize that loving you isn't about guilt or obligation or trying to fix the past. It's about choosing to be present for the future, whatever that looks like. It's about being brave enough to build something new instead of trying to resurrect something we lost." The medical team began wheeling Zara toward the operating room, but Omar walked alongside the gurney, his hand still holding hers. "Omar," Zara started, but he shook his head. "I resigned from Rashid International yesterday," he said quickly. "Sold my shares to Tariq. I'm starting a foundation for single mothers and their children, housing, medical care, educational support. I'm calling it the Adam Foundation." Zara's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Omar, you didn't have to." "Yes, I did." Omar squeezed her hand as they reached the operating room doors. "Not for you, not for guilt, not to prove anything. I did it because it's who I want to be. The man Adam would have been proud to call father, the man your daughter deserves to know." "Mr. Rashid, you need to wait outside now," Dr. Farah said gently. Omar leaned down and kissed Zara's forehead softly. "I love you," he whispered, "not because of our past, but because of who you are right now, in this moment. Be strong, Habibti. Come back to us." The operating room doors closed, leaving Omar alone in the waiting area, with nothing but hope and fear for company. For the next hour, Omar paced the small waiting room, his mind cycling through every prayer he'd ever learned. And some he made up on the spot. The foundation he'd told Zara about wasn't a desperate gesture. He'd been planning it for weeks, working with lawyers and social workers to create something meaningful, something that honored Adam's memory while helping other families avoid The struggles Zara had faced alone. When Dr. Farah finally emerged, still in surgical scrubs but with a broad smile on her face, Omar felt his knees go weak with relief. "Congratulations," she said warmly. "You have a beautiful, healthy daughter. 6 pounds, 2 ounces. She came out screaming like she had something important to say. And Zara. Tired but perfect. The surgery went smoothly. She's in recovery now, asking for you." Omar followed Dr. Farah through the corridors to the recovery room, where Zara lay propped up in bed, a tiny bundle in her arms. When she saw him, her face lit up with the kind of joy Omar hadn't seen in 8 years. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly. Omar approached slowly, hardly daring to breathe. The baby was perfect, tiny features, dark hair, and when she opened her eyes, they were the same warm brown as her mother's. "What's her name?" Omar asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Nadia," Zara replied. "It means hope in Arabic. Nadia Adam Okafor." The inclusion of Adam's name as her middle name broke something open in Omar's chest. This little girl would carry her brother's memory with her always, a bridge between past and future, loss and hope. "Would you like to hold her?" Zara asked Omar's. Hands trembled as he carefully took Nadia from her mother's arms. The baby was so small, so perfect, so completely innocent of all the complicated history that had brought them to this moment. As he looked down at her tiny face, Omar felt something shift inside him, not the desperate guilt that had driven him for months, but a quiet, steady love that had nothing to do with the past and everything to do with the future. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Your brother has been telling me all about you." Nadia made a soft sound, as if responding to his voice, and Omar felt tears stream down his face. "Omar," Zara said quietly, and when he looked up, her expression was soft, open, vulnerable in a way he hadn't seen since before everything went wrong. "What happens now?" Omar looked at the woman he'd never stopped loving, holding the daughter who represented hope and new beginnings, and realized he finally knew the answer. "Now," he said, settling into the chair beside her bed while still cradling Nadia, "we build a family, not to replace what we lost, not to fix what went wrong, but to create something new, something brave." "Are you sure?" Zara asked, studying his face. "Because I meant what I said in the hospital. I won't let you sacrifice your life. Out of obligation." "I'm not sacrificing anything," Omar replied, his voice steady and certain. "I'm choosing everything that matters. You, Nadia, the memory of Adam, and the chance to be the man I should have been 8 years ago. And your family, their expectations." Omar's smile was peaceful, content. "My family is right here in this room. Everything else is just noise." 6 months later, Omar stood in the garden of their new home. Not a sterile penthouse or imposing mansion, but a warm, lived-in house with toys scattered on the floor and baby pictures covering every surface. The Adam Foundation had opened its first facility, providing housing and support services to 50 single mothers and their children. Zara had joined the foundation as its director, bringing her business expertise and personal understanding to the work. As Omar watched Zara playing with Nadia in the garden, he thought about the choices that had brought them here. The foundation was thriving, funded not just by his initial investment, but by donations from others who believed in their mission. The work was demanding but fulfilling in ways that corporate profits had never been. His phone buzzed with a text from Tariq. "Mother wants to know when you're bringing the family for dinner. She's been knitting blankets for Nadia for 3 months. Omar smiled, typing back, "Tell her we'll come next week, all of us." It had taken his family time to accept that Omar had chosen love over their expectations, but Nadia had a way of melting even the most stubborn hearts. His mother, initially disapproving of the unconventional family Omar had created, had become utterly besotted with her granddaughter. "Omar," Zara called from the garden, "come see this. Nadia's trying to grab the flowers." As Omar joined his family in the garden, he felt a peace he'd never known before. Not the peace of success or wealth or social approval, but the deep contentment that came from being exactly where he belonged, with exactly the people who mattered most. On quiet evenings, when Nadia was sleeping and Zara was reading in their living room, Omar sometimes walked to the small memorial garden they'd created in their backyard. Adam's memory lived there in the white roses they tended together, in the small stone with his name, in the stories they would tell Nadia about the brother who loved her before she was born. Love, Omar had learned, wasn't about perfection or timing, or making all the right choices from the beginning. It was about showing up again and again, even when you'd failed before. It was about choosing courage over comfort, truth over convenience, and hope over fear. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, love gave you a second chance to get it right. As Nadia's laughter filled their garden, and Zara's hand found his, Omar knew that some stories don't end with the mistakes you make. They begin with the choice to write a different ending. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.